Good morning, everyone. This is so exciting for me because this is a subject matter that's near and dear to my heart. One of the things that Justine didn't have a chance to say is I'm also the national spokesperson for the American Fertility Association. And one of our passion projects is to bring more light to the LGBT community when it comes to paths to parenthood. So I'm so thrilled that both of these women are joining us today. I wanted to introduce Alice Kessler, who's actually going to moderate this session with Marianne. She's a California-based attorney and legislative advocate. Between 2006 and 2010, she served as the Director of Government Affairs for Equality California. And they are also the sponsor for this session, so thank you for that, Alice. It's the largest statewide LGBT advocacy organization in the country. She also represents the organization in Sacramento as an independent lobbyist. And Equality California's work includes legislation that seeks to improve the lives of families headed by same-sex couples or LGBT individuals seeking to build families. And Alice also works on issues of women's equality, domestic violence, and health care. And I'm sure I don't need to introduce Marianne Williamson, but I'm thrilled to. And as is the case for many of you, for many years, Marianne has been in my life longer than she knows. Her book, A Course in Miracles, was actually a gift to me by my mother on the eve of my wedding in 1989. And she also spearheaded the organization Angel Food. And it was at the height of the AIDS crisis, and I was doing a play called Tamara. And we would, at the end of each evening, pack up all of the food from Ma Maison and put it in one of the actors' cars and drive it down to Angel Food so that her volunteers could deliver this food to the in-house AIDS patients. It was not only about nurturing their bodies, but it was about giving them human contact in a time that at the AIDS crisis, there was so much fear around the victims that it gave them a sense of community, it gave them a sense of support, and Marianne really was the spearhead of that. I remember sitting in various churches over the years, surrounded by kindred souls who were bolstered by Marianne's teachings and moved by her spiritual commitment, as well as her compassion. And the power of prayer. Marianne Williamson is a voice of our times, a messenger, a leader, a mother, and an activist. She is the leading edge of consciousness in her work and is the best-selling author of over 16 books, many of them I'm sure you have read, as well as I, that have inspired and empowered people from all over the world. She continues to lecture on a weekly basis, reaching out into the community, and her powerful presence holds a message of love, hope, activism, and empowerment. She's also a fierce stand for equality in marriage and family building and female reproductive rights. Most people would rest on those accomplishments. But Marianne, being the woman that she is, has decided that it's time that our governing body reflects the values of the voices of the people who are conscious seekers, and has thrown her hat into the political ring and is running for the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm blown away by that commitment. And I might put words in your mouth, but she believes that love should be our bottom line, and in politics as well as in everything else, and so do I. So it is my great honor to introduce you to a woman I would be blessed to call friend and privileged to call my House of Representatives in Congress. So please welcome Marianne Williamson and Alice Kessler.
Thank you so much, Brenda. What a beautiful introduction. And I just wanted to thank Fertility Planit for inviting me to moderate this conversation with Marianne. It's such an honor to be able to do so. And I also did want to thank Equality California, which is the sponsor of this session. And in addition to the hashtag FPLA14, you can also hashtag Marianne for Congress as well, so we can get a conversation started there as well. Just quickly, by way of introduction, before we jump in with Marianne, I just wanted to note that I myself am a parent of a 2-year-old daughter. My wife, Michelle, is here today. And we conceived our daughter through use of an anonymous sperm donor with a process called open identity, so that our daughter, when she turns 18, will be able to contact him if she so chooses. And it was really a journey for us, and that's part of why I wanted to be here today, to support all the families that are here on their journey. So we're talking about family equality, and thinking about your early work with Project Angel Food, it seems to me, I just step back and think, wow, we've come so far since those days when gay people really were in the shadows in so many ways, and now we have marriage equality in 17 states. And it feels like this issue of family equality in many ways is sort of a next frontier. And you think about the struggles that a lot of communities still face, you know, single people who are parenting on their own and still facing a lot of societal stigma, mixed race families, and the challenges that families that are different may face. So I was just wondering if you could reflect on where you think that we are right now and where we're headed.
Well, a society goes through developmental phases, just like an individual does. And it takes time to layer in understanding, to really integrate what that understanding means, to embrace the kind of behavioral changes that would be necessary were you to truly be integrous with what you have come to believe. Now, with my generation, you know, by the time the AIDS crisis hit in like the mid-'80s, gay people were not in the shadows in West Hollywood. But many of the people who were dealing with the disease here were not from West Hollywood. They were from other places in the country and had the additional trauma and grief, not only of their disease, but also of lack of understanding among family members, even rejection by family members. That was some of the biggest drama of that time. Not only am I dying, but I have to tell my parents I'm gay, and all of the things that went along with that. Things are changing. Things are changing in this country. And as you mentioned, the marriage equality issue shows how much they're changing, particularly the fact that for young people, it's like a no-brainer. And so we want to be compassionate with our society. America sometimes doesn't move as quickly as we'd all like, but we tend to ultimately go in the right direction. And I think that that's happening today around marriage equality and gay people in general. You know, you could say as a woman, for instance, there's now this quote-unquote war on women. Society, just like individuals, does not move in a straight line. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and I think that's happening with a lot of homophobia in the United States today. There's a lot of blowback because people know that this thing is opening up and that genie will never be put back in the bottle. But once again, you simply come to understand how these things work. I'm a Jew. You simply know that anti-Semitism exists. I'm a woman. I simply know that misogyny exists. I mean, there's certain things in life where until the world is perfect, the world is not. And you don't consciously rail against certain things after a certain point, so much as you get about the work of creating a society in which those things will no longer occur. Now, the good news about the gay community, from what I can see as an ally, and I think AIDS had a lot to do with this, was that it was an awakener among the gay community. There's no doubt about it. Human rights campaign and all those things, which I think were born from that, weren't they? Which is now a serious political force. There's no doubt about that. So I think the AIDS crisis was, among other things, a real awakener. Mm-hmm. And there have been some positive benefits of what was obviously a terrible event.
Yeah, and absolutely something that is still there and that we're still fighting against that terrible disease. I wanted to ask you about some of the barriers that are in place for families who are created in different kinds of ways. And this conference is a lot about, you know, diverse families.
Right.
We have panels today on single dads. We have people who are building their families through adoption, maybe through use of a sperm donor, surrogacy. There's such a diversity there. And in each of those ways, each of those avenues through family building, there are challenges in place. Right. They might be legal barriers. In order to adopt a child, you have to go through a long process, medical barriers. Right. And I'm wondering, you know, given that you're running for office, what are some policies potentially that we could look at? I wanted to mention one thing that I'm aware of in California, which is there's a bill pending that would require all male restrooms have changing stations, which I think is such a great thing. Because, on the one hand, it's like...
Good.
On the one hand, it
Let
supports...
them do it.
Thank you. So, how can we continue to break down those barriers for different kinds of families?
Well, first of all, you've said several times what we need to fight. And as I said a few minutes ago, it's less about fighting anything to me and more about creating something new. And you do this by stepping back and having a real deep sense of the moral imperative. So the moral imperative for me has to do with two things, children and democracy. For instance, even on the equality thing, I don't think gay people should be able to get married because they're gay. I think you should be able to get married because you're American, which means you should be able to do whatever you want to do. And that is a deeper issue than just the rights of one particular group. It's the principle of democracy itself. And that gives you a moral authority when you speak. Because it doesn't sound like you're just, not you particularly, but any of us, we're not just stomping our feet, I want, I want, I want. It's more, we stand for, we stand for, we stand for. And it's a higher vibration. I personally am the godmother to two young men now who were adopted from the foster care, LA foster care system by a gay man who is also godfather to my daughter. So I have some very up-close and personal experience of that. And having read the book, I'm sure many of you have read that extraordinary book by Janet Fitch, White Oleander. You will never think the same about foster care. I think for the most part, for myself, and I think for a lot of us, until reading that book, I didn't think about foster children much at all. But boy, you read that book and they're on your screen. Anything that can create more of an opportunity for these children to have a loving home. This, as a society, is something we should be doing everything possible to pave the way for. That's number one. So anything that opens up that, number one. Number two, and I am a mother, and I'm a single mother. And by the time I had my child, I had my child in Los Angeles, so it wasn't like, oh, how dare you. But at the same time, it was not quite as casual as it is now. And I was reminded how awful it would have been were I in a society, in an area of the country or the world, or at a particular time in history where there would have been loaded onto me such extraordinary condemnation and judgment. So it goes back to the amazing blessing of living in a free society. The point of living in a free society is I can do whatever I want to do unless it hurts someone else. And that's the underlying principle here. E pluribus unum means out of many, one. And we are a religiously pluralistic society. We are an ethnically pluralistic society. We are a culturally pluralistic society. And obviously a sexually pluralistic society. We got all kinds of things here. That's the richness and the beauty of America. And when we stand for that principle for anyone, we're standing for it for all of us. And I think that is where the alliances come from. And I think you can see this in the equality issue. I'm sure you feel, as a gay woman, you feel that. It's not, I'm sure you no longer feel like only gay people help. Clearly there's a lot of standing on this ground because it's a democratic principle. We don't do slavery. We don't do lack of women's suffrage. We don't do legalized segregation. We just don't do those things in America. And I think that marriage equality is the latest in that lineage of the dedication and the commitment on the part of Americans to expanding the democratic franchise until no one is left out. We don't do except for them. If you're going to do a democratic society of equality of rights and opportunities, there is no except for them. And I think marriage, I've officiated at many weddings. And I've officiated at gay weddings as well as straight weddings. But I'll tell you something. I officiated at one gay wedding that was legal. It was in Washington, D.C. And you know what? It was different. But when I was in Washington, D.C., and was able to say, by the authority vested in me, by the laws of the District of Columbia, I was very happy. And I'll tell you something that happened. It was Art Smith's wedding. He's the one, the chef on Oprah a lot and stuff. He now has a restaurant in Washington. And it was very interesting because he and his now husband, the wedding was in Washington, D.C., and all of the guests before the wedding walked over from the hotel to the Lincoln Memorial. And standing on the steps at the Lincoln Memorial, speaking to the assembled guests about about what this meant for all of us, that we were attending a legal ceremony of marriage for gay Americans. It was profound. It was profound for me. I think it was profound for all of us. So claiming this is not just so gay people can get married. It's so that, in an expanded sense, so that America can, in even one more way, become all that it can be.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think I often reflect that at our wedding, it was very important and profound for us, obviously, as the people getting married, but it was also very meaningful for our families and our friends.
Yeah.
For them to be a witness to that, and it meant so much to them.
And it was a legal wedding.
It was legal, absolutely. And so that's, when people raise this issue of, well, why do we even need marriage at all? And why is that the thing we're fighting for? I'm reminded of how much it means in the eyes of our community, our families, our friends.
I want to tell you two stories. One was something that shifted me. Didn't shift me in that I needed to be shifted because I was against it, but something that impacted me and added to my commitment on this issue. I was going on the Larry King show, and this was years ago, talking about marriage equality, and a friend of mine, it was David Bender, who now I think is very active in the human rights. I'm not sure. I haven't seen him in a few years. He said, for years, people have been telling us we're not living a traditional enough lifestyle. Now we want to do the most traditional thing possible, and you don't want us to. I thought, that really made emotional and psychological sense to me. So I think that these are so interesting, these ways in which we find that we all heal in life one iota at a time. And I think even with, we have a sense, oh, they're not for it. And, Martin Luther King said, you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. So it's so important, and that's why I think we want to avoid words like we're going to fight, we're going to fight, we're going to fight, because if people feel you're fighting them, they're probably not going to be on your side later in the day. And so we want to persuade people, not just fight people, persuade people. And it's like Abraham Lincoln said, this town is full of our enemies, and he said, you're right, we need to make them our friends immediately so we won't have any more enemies here. Right? And I think that that's important. And we all know, well, if you know a gay person, then you don't feel that way, et cetera. But I just think these little opportunities that we have for moral persuasion, we should never take advantage, we should never lose sight of how much opportunity there is among people who they're defensive because they haven't been shown a certain kind of light. They can only come through graciousness and respect.
And I agree with you that I think that we can reach them oftentimes by showing them our light. And
that's right.
Meeting them where they're at and
that's right.
not,
that's
immediately
right.
chastising them. And
exactly.
so I couldn't agree more with that. Getting back for a second to what we were talking about, with the importance of something being legal and recognized in the eyes of the law, I think about children of same-sex couples and children of any family that's maybe a little bit different, and why it's so important that they have those legal protection and that recognition. It's the dignity of children, and that, in fact, was something that in the recent Supreme Court case on Prop 8, which overturned Prop 8, one of the justices, the deciding justice in that case, talked about the arguments about the dignity of children really being what persuaded him. And I feel like children are so often sort of put in the middle of this debate, and there are even groups that bring up these studies that say children who don't have a mom and a dad don't do as well as children who have a mom and a dad. And those studies, of course, have been debunked. But how do we fight against those kinds of myths, and how do we ensure?
We heard nothing that I said.
Language is a powerful thing.
You become a lobbyist, and you can't get that away from the word.
How do we persuade? How do we persuade those who seem so unpersuadable at times on an issue that seems so just polarizing as that?
Well, first of all, you draw your case in a more beautiful and compelling way. Thomas Jefferson was the prime example of this. You make your case to the world. That's what the Declaration of Independence was. It is incumbent upon us to explain what we're doing here. And those are the great moral documents of the planet. First of all, I remember my mother saying to me something that's so powerful. There is no such thing as an illegitimate child. Remember, there was a time in the society, that's how my own daughter would have been termed, illegitimate. And I think that's very important. There is no such thing as an illegitimate child. Number two, on this issue of gender and children, and I say this once again as a single parent, there is something about mother and father figures. There absolutely is. I was a single mother. My daughter has 4 gay men who are her godfathers. You know what? It was important that there be a man there. There was important that there be a man there. It has nothing to do with biology, but there is deep gender. There are deep gender issues. I remember when my daughter was little, and I used to, they're her godfathers, they were like a team, and they still are. And I remember when she was just really little, and she'd be about to come in the room, and I'd say to them, remember to tell her she looks pretty. Remember to tell her she looks pretty. You know, there is something about the little girl growing up and the daddy figure. We know this now. You know, they did a $25 million study about mentoring, and they found that the single element that makes a child learn in school that's more potent than anything else is that one adult a week shows an hour of care that they succeed at school. And that, you know, in trying to justify, I guess, the fact that $25 million was spent on something any of us could have just, like, told them, came from the fact that apparently it was radical information that it did not have to be a biological parent. So that's very important. At the same time, there are some natural patterns. I always say to gay people, I always used to say to gay men when I was a younger woman all the time, I used to say from the stage, you don't have to screw us, but you can't ignore us, right? And I think that there is a male-female, yin-yang, masculine-feminine, man-woman dynamic on the planet that is very profound. It has nothing to do with the act of sexuality, but it does have to do with some dynamics, and I think that this is important. And I think that it is important in the lives of children. And just as I said, my one gay man, friend of mine, David Kessler, is a godfather to my daughter. I am godmother to his sons. And I think that is important. I don't think it's important at all, whether it's 2 mommies or 2 daddies. But I would think that any parent was responsible for as part of the healthy emotional dynamic in the lives of children, that any child be raised with a healthy development related to both males and females on the planet. But the beauty of this conversation is that that doesn't have to do with who has sex with who. That doesn't have to do with who's married to who. That doesn't, you know, and this has been a development in our society for a long time, the quote-unquote non-traditional family.
So I think we're going to move to Q&A in a minute, but I had a question that I've been thinking a lot about and wanted to ask you because I wanted to get sort of your perspective on this, even for sort of some of the struggles I face, which is to be a family that's not the cookie cutter and to be different often takes a lot of courage. You know, even traveling down here to Los Angeles with my family, there's so many times when people look at you and they're trying to figure out what's going on, who's the mom here, right? And it just sometimes takes a lot of courage to just be in society, be out in the world, and be able to stand up and be proud and say, this is my family, and we're beautiful. And I just was wondering if you had any words of wisdom for those families that face some of those challenges just by virtue of who they are on a daily basis.
I don't know if they're words of wisdom, but they're definitely words of acknowledgement. I really admire you for doing it. And I think that I can totally understand how that would be true. And I really admire you and others like you who simply do it and stand in pride. You know, there are all kinds of things we go through in life where people are spitting at us. And even if we're living at a time or in a place or in a situation where they're not spitting physically, you can feel them spitting at you emotionally. You can feel them spitting at you psychologically. And I get my share of that from something not as deep as that, but in my career and so forth. You know, there's a term in recovery, contempt prior to investigation. People who don't even know you, who judge you, who know nothing about your life, nothing about what you're doing with your children, and presume. So I can only imagine, and it's not only going to change, it is changing because of people like yourselves who are standing proud and standing tall and just going forward and raising fantastic children. And on a certain level, in a certain number of years, they will just have to get over it.
Absolutely. And it was Harvey Milk who said that one of the most powerful things we can do is to come out. And
yeah, and for that reason, he was right, wasn't he?
He was, and it's a constant process. It's, you know, I came out officially when I was 19 years old, but I'm coming out every day, and all of these different social interactions. And it's so important to continue doing that because, as you said, the more I do it, the easier it becomes for those who are also following.
Absolutely that. And it's just a life principle how on any given day we will be tempted to get smaller. We will be tempted to diminish ourselves. We will be tempted to de-juice ourselves in order to get along more easily. I mean, that's no matter who you are and no matter what you're doing. And I think particularly as women, but for all of us, it's not even gender. There's always in everybody's life some way in which if we would only compromise with what we really want, we'll get more approval from someone.
I actually would go back to what Marianne said earlier about, society always wanting to make us feel small and how the more that you can muster that courage and not allow your power to be taken away and have that sense of pride, I think is really important. But it takes having role models and it takes having visibility, which is why I'm so glad that we're here in this conversation today and that a conference like this is so inclusive of the different kinds of families that are out there and that we're giving them a face.
I think it's important, though, that we not, playing victim is never a position of power, ever. And so society wants to take this away from us. Actually, let's be really clear here. This society gives more freedom to everyone in this room than in any society in the world. The very fact that we can be here to discuss these things is more power than the majority of people have on the planet. So let's take a moment to appreciate this society and appreciate our freedoms and appreciate what democracy means. I remember I was speaking at a gay pride event a couple of years ago in San Diego, and a friend of mine who lives in Dubai, she's an American, but she's lived in Dubai for many years, had her daughter there, and she was here with her young teenage daughter, and her friend, also from Dubai. And I was talking, and other people were talking at this gay day event, and these girls were sitting there like this. Because they live in a place where never in a million years could you be having a gay day parade. Hopefully within a million years, but you know what I'm saying. So I think that's real important. Anytime you start seeing yourself as a victim of society, no, the very fact we're here, we are a beneficiary of the freedom that allows us to take our next stand. There is a place in consciousness that is then played out in society that would seek to diminish us no matter who we are. And that was that conversation. But, whining and complaining is not the point of power. The point of power is to manifest differently. And that's what you're doing. The light casts out the darkness and the love casts out the fear.
So one of the things that I think has been really wonderful about being in a same-sex relationship is, and creating family together is how intentional I've had to be.
Right.
I haven't been able to sort of default or autopilot on much of this, and I think that's probably true for a lot of people at this conference. And so I've really enjoyed that. But I was just wondering about your thoughts on sort of intentional family making and creation and sort of what comes from that.
Anytime you do a situation or you are behaving in a way that is not the norm, you have to ask yourself, what is not here that I need to compensate for? Part of that is a gender issue, which would be no different for you than it is for me. You have a daughter. Well, you want her to have a healthy development in her early years. You want her to have a healthy development around male figures. And that is important. And that's no different yours than mine. And it does create more intentionality. For me, part of it was as a single mother. Any single mother, and you're not, but any single mother has to deal with the fact that it is tempting to make your child too much of your confidant and to load them with the kind of emotional pressure they shouldn't have. So I think with any situation in life, listen, it's about becoming more conscious no matter what we do. And I think being more intentional as a parent across the board, even, a man and a woman married having a baby, we need to be more intentional as parents in our society, and I think that that's happening. But I hear how this would create even more, and what a spiritual practice that is. Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one more question. We have one?
Mine's not so much a question as a comment. I have been just so moved by what both of you have shared, and I have a personal. I mean, I'm friends with Alice and Mitch, and it's so interesting. Just I was looking at the word family equality, and when you were speaking, I got really emotional because prior to Mitch finding Alice, you know, we were together because I was dating her cousin. And so, but there was a stigma of drug addiction in him. There was a stigma of, you know, sadly, he committed suicide, so the stigma of suicide. But interesting, like, we've gone through so much coming out together that to see their journey of meeting and getting married and them being at my wedding with my husband and both of us getting pregnant at the same time in two totally different ways. I had 3 miscarriages. Beautiful. I had a fibroid surgery. I had IUI. You know, we have Milo and we have Inez. And right now, today, at this minute, they're at our house together with our, you know, my nanny and my husband and our friends. And I just feel so like family equality centered today.
You know,
and
this is very profound here.
You know,
it's very important, and this goes back to we got to fight this, we got to fight that. It's so important what we need to celebrate. That's life that you just described. What life does when it is allowed to be life. The miracles happen when they're allowed to happen, when love is just the bottom line. Not how it's supposed to be, not how it's supposed to look, but just love was allowed to do its thing. And let's celebrate even the IVF and all of that stuff. I mean, look, it's so important that we spend enough time celebrating the beautiful things that occur. And I'm so glad that you said that. Look what life did. Look at the patterns that life created. The hallelujah, praise God part is as important as the we got to fix that part. And it gives power to us because it's not just we don't want to do that. It's we're going there. Because that's what life will do through us if we allow it to. And that's why we always want to make the stand for life and love. Because when we do that, miracles happen, such as those amazing. How amazing, Inez and Mila, I mean, 20 years from now. I mean, it's all very, very profound. Beautiful.
Yeah, we keep talking about that as well, the 20 years from now.
I'm sorry. So just as a mother, I will say for those of you who are raising children, I might find this kind of, I used to say to my daughter, she's 23 now, she came out great, she's perfect, she's fabulous, to the extent to which any of us are perfect. And I used to say to her when she was little, I don't care if you're angry today at me, Mommy, I don't care. I care if you're going to be angry at me when you're in therapy in 20 years. I want you to like me in 20 years. I don't care if you don't like me today.
Well, we can all use a little therapy in our lives, that's for sure.
And I used to turn around from the driver's seat and go, are you having a happy childhood? You're having a happy childhood, right? Because they're going to ask you later.
Well, as much as I'm sad to wrap up this session, I just wanted to end by, I wanted to thank you from my heart for being a voice for equality, for love, and supporting families like mine. You're someone who many people follow and respect, and so the power of your voice in this movement is really important. So I just wanted to really thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I wanted to, again, thank Equality California, who sponsored this session and has done so much great work to make California really the best place that you could be as an LGBT person, which is a wonderful thing. And finally, just again, remind everyone of our hashtags, FPLA14 and hashtag Marianne for Congress. And you can also... And by the way, as someone who works in politics, I often get very cynical about it. There's so much corruption. There's so much. It's just a breath of fresh air that you're running. So I wish you all the best of luck in your race.
Thank you, and I appreciate any support over the next 8 weeks at MarianneForCongress.com, coming into headquarters, helping us canvass, helping us phone bank, getting on your social media, really helping spread the word, particularly since the McCutcheon case decision yesterday that I'm sure many of you are aware of, where the traditional candidates will have so many more resources to deal with. We need to fix that, and one of the things that I want to go to Congress for is to help fix that. So I appreciate any help and any support that anyone feels moved to give. Yeah, we're on Wilshire, right?
Campaigns on Wilshire.
Yeah,
Great.
very close to here. And please tell your friends if you feel a yes in your heart. Thank you.
Wonderful. And then just also thanks to Fora.tv for live streaming this session. And there will also be videos of all the sessions on the website. So this will live on in perpetuity. And thanks for all the audiences here in person and also online for joining us today. And it's just great to be here and have this conversation.
Thank you both.